people who are made to change their beliefs, who have to not speak their own language, and who have to believe that their history was totally different. And by replacing this canonical religion with the religion, with the empty religion, which has nothing to do with our history, we see that the so-called self-proclaimed civilizational regimes of Western countries start making statements when they're protecting sects and extremist organizations who pose themselves as representatives of non-traditional religions, but we are working in line with the international law, and we respect all the obligations that we have undertaken and that have been undertaken by the overwhelming majority of the member states. For example, OSCE member states, countries of the European continent, as well as member states of the United Nations, who obliged and reaffirmed their commitment to their obligations. We do nothing that is irrelevant and is not mentioned in the international law. Kiev regime continues to shell the Russian territory, and it targets residential areas, hospitals, schools, and they just increase the number of the war crimes. On January 3rd, the armed forces of Ukraine have shelled with HIMARS the hospital in Tokmak of the Zaporozhye region, and the blast wave shattered glass windows of the pediatric hospital and maternity home when people were undergoing treatment there. And we call on international organizations, including the World Health Organization, the International Committee of the Red Cross, to give a principled assessments of the actions of the Kiev regime, who continues to pose threats for the civilian population. The desire of the Kiev regime and their Western patrons to continue the war until the last Ukrainian is demonstrated by their cynical response to the Russian proposal to declare a ceasefire during the Orthodox Christian. You will remember that Vladimir Zelensky has directly prohibited the armed forces of Ukraine to cease fire and has called the humanitarian gesture of Russia as a hypocritical cover-up for military build-up to continue military actions with new forces and resources. And the ceasefire was not welcomed by the West either. The representative and president of the European Council, Charles Michel, called the Russian ceasefire as bogus and hypocritical, end of quote. Probably Brussels has totally forgot their own history, including the fact that during the Christmas ceasefires were declared in the Belgium itself in 1914 during the World War I. The conflict in Ukraine has turned into a gold mine for the military-industrial complex of the United States by using the Ukrainian people as cannon fodder. This is probably why Leo Tolstoy is banned there. The American elites, regardless of their party affiliation, serve the interests of American manufacturers that profiteer at the expense of military supplies to Ukraine and other countries. In response to the Kiev requests in late December 2022, the Capitol Hill has approved the allocation of another 45 billion US dollars for the new financial year of 2023. And on January 6, it became known that they have approved another provision of military products worth of 2.85 billion US dollars. But Kiev authorities still believe that the Western allies do not provide enough support for Ukraine. They just want to make a profit. This is what Foreign Minister Kuleba said, who persistently asked his German colleague Annalena Baerbock, who visited Kiev and Kharkov on January 9th, the guarantees of supplying Leopard tanks by Berlin. And the Ukrainian ambassador in London, Pristaika, in his interview to Newsweek magazine on January 7th, called the NATO countries to put an end to prejudices. He's such an optimist since he believes that prejudices still exist there. And he called to not miss a unique chance and provide a large number of weapons for the purpose of defeating the arch enemy. Those who turned the blind eye and just look like they don't understand and see and hear what is going on, who do not want to get involved in the situation and to speak out their position, I think you can read, and you can read all these phrases again. The ambassador of Ukraine in London called the Western countries to leave prejudices behind, to not miss a unique chance and defeat the arch enemy. What else is necessary to understand what's going on? That everything was carried out in recent years. They present Russia as the arch enemy, and it's well known that the goal of the Western Ukraine to inflict maximum damage to Russia at any cost, which is declared as the main rival of the United States in their doctrines. I will warn Washington and its allies that American and other Western weapons in Ukraine, as well as foreign soldiers servicing it, are legitimate targets for the Russian armed forces.
We took notice on the continuous bellicose statement made by the Ukrainian officials, the Secretary of State of National Security Council of Ukraine, Mr. Danilov, who directly threatened to organize acts of sabotage on the territory of Russia. They are not acts of sabotage, they are acts of terror. And you should say it in this way, in this line, because you preach Russophobic rhetorics. Because sabotage is another thing. You should read the meaning of this word. So I believe that your officials, they are responsible for terrorist acts, and we have numerously stated it. You should call a spade a spade. You can rename all the things, and in this case, I believe that you should rename the acts of sabotage into acts of terror, because they are like this. Zelensky's advisor, Mr. Padelak. So I would like to say that it looks like absurd situation. And the head of Minister of Defense of Ukraine, Mr. Budanov, continued to dream of the Russian Crimea. They propose frenzy ideas far beyond reality and common sense. With that, the Kiev authorities do not doubt to acknowledge that for them, Ukrainians, ordinary Ukrainians, are expendable material in the fight against Russia. And Minister of Defense of Ukraine, Mr. Reznikov, explicitly declared that they are participated in the conflict against Russia, and they carry out the NATO mission in which the alliance itself is not spilling its blood. Ukraine is spilling its blood instead. It looks like nonsense, because you're talking about the people who voted for you, who elected you, and you then had promised a lot of things to the Ukrainian people, and right now you are perpetrating atrocities because you explicitly say that you service NATO by killing your own civilians. You're not doing it for the sake of Ukraine. You're doing it to carry out NATO mission instead. So it turns out that the image that was proposed by a lot of Ukrainian women, right now we can use this image to depict the Kiev regime, Zelensky regime, who is serving the collective West. So no matter how hard the collective West tries to arm the Ukrainian army to encourage them to fight against Russia, so these attempts are doomed to fail. All the goals of the special military operation that the Russian leadership stated will be accomplished. So it is not that I wanted to say. There are only examples. There is not all of the facts, but these are examples of the facts that a lot of weapons are misused. And right now you can figure out where these weapons are going to. In the course of briefings and official statements, we have repeatedly said that there are numerous indications of misuse of weapons supplied by NATO countries to Ukraine. Since the very beginning, we stated that these weapons could go to the European black markets, and nobody is safe from these dangerous weapons to be circulating in black markets. So right now it looks like a systematic problem. It is not a separate or unique situation. It looks like a reality. So let's look at some facts. On the 1st of June 2022, Interpol Secretary General of Jürgen Stock warned that after the end of the conflict in Ukraine, there is a high probability of illegal trade of weapons originally destined for Kiev. On the 1st of July 2022, the Russian news agency RT carried out an investigation and found out that an important element to carry out illegal transactions is through darknet. So darknet offers to buy rackets for anti-tank racket complex Javelin for $30,000, but it cost $178,000 for American taxpayers. They also offer missiles for anti-tank missile complex for $15,000, kamikaze drones for $7,000, small arms, grenades, booby armor from $1,000 to $3,000, including delivery. And the buyer and the supplier often do not see each other because they, after money transfer, so the consumer receives the coordinates with the location, and that is all. Right now, darknet includes weapons, but these weapons, they are supplied by Western countries to Ukraine. On the 21st of July 2022, the Office of National Security and Defense Council of Ukraine announced the launch of SOTA information and analysis system in order to ensure transparency of the supplies of Western weapons to Ukraine. So it was Ukraine itself, it was the Kiev regime that half a year ago tried to control the circulation of weapons supplied by the West to Ukraine. Since then, since the system was implemented, there have been no results. On the 22nd of July 2022, Jan Opgen-Opt, official representative of Europol, in his interview to a German news agency, said that there is a high risk that all the weapons supplied to Ukraine will end up in the hands of criminals, crime groups, and terrorists. According to him, a lot of cases became to be known that people left Ukraine with weapons. According to Europol, criminal networks in the region are going to smuggle weapons and ammunition, including heavy weapons, using existing supply routes and online platforms. Can you believe it? It is not cold, but it is heavy weapons. So it is not this type of small weapons and light munition that criminals could hide. Right now, heavy weapons are circulating in unknown directions, and this is data from Interpol. On the 4th of August 2022, the American company CBS released a documentary, Arming Ukraine. It is an investigation. Yes, it wasn't so large scale, but it is devoted to the arms smuggling and the cases of its emergence, not in Ukraine. Volunteers who participated in the film, as well as military experts, they declared the following thing. It was made by the CBS. So they claimed that up to from 60 to 70% of Western aid did not reach the Ukrainian army, from 60 to 70%. Not what I'm not talking about the military aid that reached the Ukrainian army and then disappeared. If we count on this data, from 30 to 40% of military aid can disappear. However, in some days, can you guess what happened with this film? This documentary was removed from the website, as well as some degrading, discrediting comments. They also disappeared from the social media. Everything was removed. On the 30th of October 2022, in his interview to local news agency Yele, Crystal Ahgren claimed that the weapons destined for Ukraine, including assault rifles, pistols, grenades, combat drones. So all of these armaments were discovered in some European countries. So one more time, we understand the situation. We know what customs means. We understand this procedure. We used to see warnings, how pistols and grenades look like. Yes, we know that sometimes people can supply this type of weapons, but what about combat drones? It cannot happen accidentally. You cannot bring these combat drones by train, by plane. I believe that it should be another type of route, special route, in order to supply these types of weapons in to different countries, not to Ukraine. It is the only way how you can deliver a combat drone. So it used to be like that. They are facts. According to him, and one more time I would like to say that I'm citing the commissar of the Central Criminal Police of Finland, and I would like to cite him. They're very interested in acquisition of modern system of weapons, ammunition, and arms. So he said that Ukrainian weapons have already emerged in the Netherlands, Denmark, and Sweden, and all of these three states. Do you know how they commented on the case? In no case, they didn't comment on it. On the 1st of November 2022, the article in the Washington Post, citing anonymous sources, the U.S. State Department noted that out of 22,000 units of weapons, only 10% were under control. On the 17th of November 2022, the U.S. Congress announced the system of an audit system for supplies and financial tranches to Ukraine. As Republican representative in the lower house, Marjorie Taylor Greene, said, and I would like to cite here, American people deserve to know where their money go to another country who is even not a member of NATO alliance. So I believe that all of the people have the right to know where NATO weapons go to. On the 13th of November 2022, President of Nigeria, Muhammadu Buhari, within the framework of the 16th Summit of Heads of States and Governments of the Lake Chad Basin Commission, stated that the authorities discovered weapons destined for the Ukrainian army in the hands of terrorists. We are talking about Chad. These two countries do not have the same border, but these weapons were destined for Ukraine. On the 15th of December 2022, there was an explosion of the grenade launcher in the office of the police officer of Poland, Yaroslav Szymczyk. According to statements, the weapon was brought from Kiev to Warsaw on a special train without any control at the border. On the 16th of December 2022, British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak took the decision to carry out an audit in order to control assistance to Ukraine, since London wants to know what they put in and what they got out of this military assistance. So we are going to tell the British what they really put into this assistance and what they can get out of it. Not long ago, on the 9th of January, in Oslo, Mr. Stoltenberg, NATO Secretary General, was awarded, and this award, named after Gunnar Sønstebø, an outstanding hero of the Norwegian resilience during the Second World War. And among the merits of this new prize winner, there are his contribution to the support of unity in the alliance in hard times, as well as promotion of the membership of Finland and Sweden in NATO, and assistance to Ukraine. We consider disgraceful and ridiculous to award a figure who has nothing to do with democracy, with peace and security on the European continent. And taking in mind that the alliance headed by the Norwegian supports and pumps up the Kiev regime with Ukraine, I would like to recall you that there are swastika symbols, the heroes of nationalists, and so on and so forth. So all of these things are supported by the collective West, by NATO, first and foremost. How can you award named after anti-fascist to people who right now support this fascism? So it is impossible, but unfortunately it happens. Let's move to another issues. Terror in Kabul. We strongly condemn a terrorist act that happened in the vicinity of the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Afghanistan in Kabul. ISIS has claimed responsible for this incident. Because of the attack, more than 40 people were killed and injured. Among them, there are Minister for Foreign Affairs staff. We express our condolences to the beloved one of the victims, and we wish them speedy recovery. The same event was targeted to Russian and Pakistani diplomatic missions in Kabul. We hope that the Afghan government will find those responsible and bring them to justice, and we urge the Afghan authorities to eliminate the terrorist threat in the country, and we know the importance of coordinating regional and international efforts to combat this scourge. So let's move on to another issue, that is Armenian-Azerbaijani normalization of relations. We have received numerous issues and questions that overlap each other. These are the questions from news agencies such as TASS, Anadolu, Vestnik Kavkaza, Virelk, portal News.ru and so on and so forth. They all concern the problems of the relations between Moscow, Baku and Yerevan, as well as the aspects of Armenian-Azerbaijani settlement. Most of these stories are associated with the press conference held between Prime Minister of Armenia, Nikol Pashinyan, President of Azerbaijan, Aliyev. This event was held on the 10th of January. We are concerned with the degradation of relations between Baku and Yerevan, intensification of harsh rhetorics, which is accompanied with increase in tension in the region. We call on the parties to demonstrate goodwill and seek for compromise. And we're going to support this process. Not long ago, the day before, we commented on the contradictory statement made by Armenian leader to elaborate a peace treaty in Baku. One more time, I would like to say that the Armenian side lost a good opportunity to initiate another round of talks with Azerbaijan on the 23rd of December 2022 concerning the Lachin corridor. But still, Russian proposal remains valid, and we are ready to provide a venue for talks between the heads of the foreign ministries of Armenia and Azerbaijan. During the talks with journalists, the head of Armenia, Mr. Pashinyan, made a lot of noteworthy comments, in particular regarding the CSTO. This comment was explicitly explained by the spokesperson Mr. Dmitry Peskov. Armenia continues to act in accordance with its priorities for its armed forces. Thus, it didn't deploy military troops to participate in joint exercises with the CSTO in Kazakhstan.
Allies have to adapt their plans again, and as far as we know, this work is carried out within the CSTO, and we expect that all the solutions will be developed to ensure the effective preparation of peacekeepers and to ensure their smooth work and coordination. As for the Lachin corridor, I would like to sum up all the questions and to provide a comprehensive answer. We continue working on unblocking this corridor in line with the statements of the leaders of Russia, Azerbaijan, and Armenia of November 9th, 2020. The Russian Foreign Ministry of Interior, Defense Ministry, and the command of the Russian peacekeeping contingent are taking consistent de-escalation steps, and it's necessary to find a solution that will be acceptable for all parties. At the moment, the humanitarian convoys are going through the corridor, and we would like to note that it is unacceptable to make public provocations and verbal attacks against our peacekeepers who are guarantors of peace in the region. Such actions might inflict serious and significant damage to the process of the Armenian-Azerbaijan normalization. As for the draft statement of the UN Security Council for the media, where which addressed the Lachin corridor, such explanations were provided by the permanent representative of Russia in New York. It was stated that despite our constructive determination, the French authors of the document ignored the overwhelming majority of the Russian proposals. Our Western colleagues were not courageous enough even to give all the facts, particularly to mention the statements of leaders of Russia, Azerbaijan, and Armenia, which are a fundamental part of the Armenian Azerbaijan normalization. In any case, we're ready to work, but not to be engaged in populism. We're ready to work meaningfully to settle the situation around the Russian corridor. As for the delimitation of Armenian and Azerbaijan border, we consistently support the work of the relevant bilateral commission. We're ready to provide every assistance in its work, including by providing materials like maps and cartography, and the progress in this area will help to effectively settle disputes on the ground, and the unblocking of transportation communication in the regions are carried out by the trilateral working group under the chairmanship of Deputy Prime Ministers of Russia, Azerbaijan, and Armenia. Under its aegis, they have carried out a serious preparatory work, but it requires additional joint efforts to translate them into practice. I would like also to give the commentary on our relations with Armenia. Russian and Armenian peoples share
ОДКБ
strong ties of friendship that goes back to the history, and we are ready to strengthen bilateral relations and their interaction within the integration associations like CSU, EU, the Commonwealth of Independent States. In this background, the statements of Yerevan that the Russian presence provides certain threats to the security of Armenia are absurd. For decades, our border security agents and soldiers have made a significant and substantial contribution to ensuring security of Armenia, and they protect its borders and frontiers. It is objective reality which is impossible to negate. And earlier, the Armenian leadership has publicly stated that the military presence of Russia meets its national interests, and opportunists that call our soldiers to leave do not understand the real consequences of such move. So we have provided our comprehensive questions. So if you have any questions, proceed from the assumption that we have already provided answers for many questions that you have today. Going on, Nord Stream and what happened to it. I'm talking about the acts of sabotage, the acts of terrorism, criminal acts that have led to the destruction of this infrastructural peaceful project. So I would like to tell you about the investigation process. We're perplexed by the investigation, particularly by the refusal of Sweden to respond on the merits of the Prosecutor General's Office legal assistance request on the criminal proceedings of the damage in Nord Stream 1 and Nord Stream 2 pipelines in September 2022. I mentioned the Prosecutor General's Office, and I congratulate our colleagues with their professional holiday that is celebrated today. Going back to the investigation, Swedish officials explained their position with that granting our request would pose a security threat to Sweden. This is just a direct quote. Which is surprising. I would ask our Swedish colleagues, is blasting the gas pipeline, does it constitute a security threat to Sweden? If it is, then we would like to hold an international investigation that would help to understand who represents a threat to Sweden and other countries, because we were talking about the Baltic Sea, and to do that and to do everything to avoid the repetition of this incident in the future, because we believe that our country has suffered a serious damage. I'm not even talking about serious losses. But what happened to our infrastructure that we have been building for years? It is a serious damage and losses. And we have the right to receive the information we need. We have a right to ask questions, and you must answer them. In 2020, by the way, the Swedish authorities referred to the same arguments when they motivated their refusal to provide legal assistance in investigating the incident with Mr. Navalny. At the same time, the Russian side was informed about the fact that the Swedish prosecutors have no interest in implementing the Russian initiative to establish a joint investigative group to investigate the damage of pipelines. But again, what is the explanation for not having a comprehensive investigation in which our country could be involved as the country who suffered from that. Swedish authorities haven't answered to the message of the Russian Prime Minister Mikhail Mishustin that was sent to the government of Sweden 3 months ago, which states the need to have comprehensive and open investigation of what happened to the pipelines, and that could involve Russian governmental authorities and Gazprom company, which is a violation of all rules of international diplomatic conversation and communication. By the way, Sweden is not the only country that ignores our requests. The neighboring countries who have something to do, who has to do with the investigation of these acts of sabotage, also ignore our requests. Why these countries do not let Russia be involved in the investigations? Are they trying to hide something? Because an act of sabotage or an act of terrorism was carried out against gas pipelines. It was not an accident. What security threats Swedish authorities are referring to? Can we have a list, please? We're not talking about the threat that Russian experts might be involved in the unbiased investigation and might make inconvenient and embarrassing conclusions and finally reveal ugly truths to the public. Who is the mastermind of these attacks? Hiding these facts proves that Swedish authorities have something to hide. Another topic. In January this year marks the 190th anniversary of the colonization of the Malvinas Islands in 1833, which laid the basis for the long sovereignty dispute between Argentina and the United Kingdom, and which led to the violent armed conflict in the 20th century. This topic is on the UN agenda, particularly on its Special Committee on Decolonization, C24, as a result of the UN General Assembly and other international fora were adopted numerous resolutions calling to resume Argentinian-British talks to develop an ultimate solution on the dispute, sovereignty dispute over the islands, as well as to refrain from unilateral actions that might change the situation in the southern Atlantic Ocean. At the same time, the United Kingdom does not show its commitment to settle this dispute, but it also takes efforts to escalate the situation in the southern Atlantic Ocean, particularly at the end of the previous year. London and Pristina, don't be surprised, yes, Pristina, Kosovo, agreed to have joint trainings of British soldiers with the members of the Kosovo security forces on the territory of Malvinas Islands. I know it sounds absurd, but it is true. In this regard, we noted the statement made by the most representative regional structure, Community of Latin American and Caribbean States, where all 33 states of Latin America and the Caribbean, with a total population of more than 600 million people, condemned this provocative action of the United Kingdom. We agree with the assessments of the CELAC, and we see in the British reluctance to hear the voice of the global south just another disregard for the decisions of multilateral organizations. For example, in its plans to use Kosovo soldiers. I understand that those people who are not deeply involved in the Balkans, in the situation in the region, who do not know it very well, who don't know very well about the issue of the Malvinas Islands, might think that they heard me wrong. What has Kosovo soldiers, what do Kosovo soldiers have to do with the Malvinas Islands and with Argentina? But this is the moment today, and the issue is that the Anglo-Saxon world is just to do every effort, do their utmost to implement their plans, to reach their goals, and they do not believe it even useful to just cover it, to hide it. In this cynical and horrible way, the United Kingdom is using the so-called Kosovo soldiers to promote their own agenda in the region where this country is not represented. But everything what is related to the dispute should be settled at the international level and in line with international law. There are all the necessary mechanisms for that. I mentioned that London plans to use Kosovo soldiers in their operations on the Malvinas Islands, and by doing so, London assists actively in improving combat readiness of Kosovo security forces, which makes it to act as one of the leading supporters of their transformation into full-fledged armed forces in the violation of the relevant UN Security Council resolution. So they pursue quite a horrible task. They're not going just to meet their own interests in Latin America, but they plan to train Kosovo forces so that they could have necessary experience. It is a scary story, but in my opinion, this is a telling example of the Anglo-Saxon philosophy. I would like to emphasize again the consistent and principled position of Russia on the Malvinas Islands, and we advocate the need to promptly resume direct negotiations between Argentina and the United Kingdom with the view to reach a peaceful and definitive solution over the sovereignty dispute in line with the UN resolutions, and believe that it is important to abstain from any action that might hinder the beginning of these negotiations, and we believe that it is unacceptable to militarize the southern Atlantic region, and it is necessary to strictly abide by international obligations by all sides. And now I will go to the bilateral relations Russia-Brazil. As you know, on January 1st, Brasilia hosted the solemn inauguration ceremony of the President of Brazil, Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, who won presidential elections in October 2020. To Russia and Brazil share ties of years-long friendship and mutual respect. In 2023, we are going to celebrate 195th anniversary of diplomatic relations between our countries. The gradual and qualitative development of bilateral cooperation fully meets the interests of our peoples, and we are satisfied with the traditionally high dynamics of Russia-Brazil contacts at the highest level. On December 20th, 2022, Russian President Vladimir Putin had a telephone conversation with his counterpart Luiz Inácio Lula, where they have expressed their confidence that Russia-Brazil strategic partnership is going to develop in all areas. On December 31st, 2022, President of Brazil, Luiz Inácio Lula, had a meeting with the Speaker of the Federation Council of the Federal Assembly of the Russian Federation, Valentina Matvienko, who was the head of the Russian delegation at the inauguration ceremony of a new Brazilian leader. In developing the practical cooperation between the two countries, the Russia-Brazil High-Level Cooperation Commission plays an important role. It is headed by the Russian Prime Minister and Vice President of Brazil. We maintain inter-ministerial dialogue, and we have a plan of political consultations between Russian and Brazilian foreign ministries for 2022-2025. Our countries share the aspiration to form a more just, democratic, polycentric world order that is based on the sovereign equality of states, mutual consideration of interests, mutually respectful dialogue, and respect of norms of international law. First and foremost, the UN Charter. We actively assist in ensuring global food and energy security, sustainable development, climate change, and other pressing issues of today. Russia and Brazil maintain constructive cooperation at various multilateral platforms like BRICS, G20, UN, and its Security Council, where currently Brazil holds a seat of a non-permanent member. Brazil is a major trade partner of our country in the Latin American region. It provides eco-friendly mineral Russia provides eco-friendly mineral fertilizers for Brazilian agro-industry complex and buys different types of agricultural produce and carries out bilateral cooperation in high-tech, pharmaceuticals, power energy, and nuclear sphere in outer space. Our economies are characterized by a high extent of adding to each other and complementing each other, and we have a high potential. I can quote the legendary football player Pelé, who once said that Russia will become a world football champion when Brazil will become a champion in hockey. We're developing cultural and humanitarian cooperation since 2000. We have established a unique and socially important joint project in culture and art. I'm talking about Bolshoi Theater School. It is located in Joinville, Santa Catarina State, where a large number of children are attending, and they come from poor families. In 2022, the Russia-Brazil Intercultural Bilingual School started its work in Rio de Janeiro, and bilateral ties are quite important for us, particularly in education. Every year, at the governmental quota, we provide scholarships for Brazilian students in Russian universities for the academic year 2022-2023. We will allocate 47 seats, and we hope that we are going to develop all the areas of the strategic partnership with the listeners.
So, let's move on. What is going on in the religious field? We were talking about it in the Ukrainian example, and I have another example. By the decision of the Norwegian authorities on the 22nd of December 22, the organization Jehovah's Witnesses was deprived from its registration as a religious commitment. So what was the reason for that? The reason was a systematic violation of the law and unwillingness of its leadership to abandon its lawful practices. Although cancellation of the registration does not entail a ban on its activities, only restrictions of powers and preferences, the Norwegian authorities demonstrated its willingness to cancel an organization that do not want to subdue its practices. But this fact does not hinder Oslo to criticize Russia. So it is not worthy that our principled stance is as follows. It is the same organization, it is the same claims, but the political response is different. When the same things happen in Russia, then the West, including Norway, say that Russia does not have the right to do so, that we persecute religious beliefs and freedoms of religion. But when the same thing happened in Norway, so everyone keeps silence, everyone does not make any comments on it. So they say that it is another topic, let's move on. So that is the situation. So such blatant interference into domestic affairs of our country has nothing to do with protection of freedom of religion and human rights. So I believe either we should have unite principles in order to assess the situation in other countries, and we, being equal, can assess the situation without national boundaries. Or, I beg your pardon, or we should comment on internal situation, and that is all, without the right to comment on some external things. So we should decide on it. I believe that right now we have a response. Since the Western point of view, there is no contradiction at all, and they believe that this situation is right. Since the Western point of view, only they have the right to control all the processes in the world, and the rest of the world does not have this right. It looks like jungle and this beautiful European garden. So it is another striking example of double standards demonstrated by Western countries, demonstrated by Norway against the Russian Federation. Another example in this regard. Let's move on. Let's move to another continent. So Moscow welcomes the EU monitoring and verification mission in order to monitor the implementation of the peace agreements to resolve the armed conflict in the northern part of the Federal Democratic Republic of Ethiopia. So we believe that the presence of the representatives of Nigeria, South Africa and Kenya is an important element to practically implement the EU mediation services. With satisfaction, we note that according to official Ethiopian authorities, after the signing of the above-mentioned agreement, Tigray has already received 106,000 tons of humanitarian food aid, 1.4 thousand tons of medicine, more than 10,000 tons of basic goods. Regular flights have been resumed Administration center of Tigray, two cities, Mekele and Shiria. We highly appreciate the assistance of the EU and its representative, and we look forward to successful resumption of coordinated efforts to ensure security and stability in Ethiopia in line with the principle to African problems, African solutions, and about information security. Vienna, on the 9th of January 2023, started the work of the fourth session of the UN Ad Hoc Open-Ended Intergovernmental Committee to elaborate a comprehensive international convention on countering criminal use of ICTs. This organ was established back in 2019 at the initiative of Russia and co-sponsored by the 46 countries and by the UN General Assembly resolution. The task is clear, is to create under the UN auspices a universal international legal mechanism to combat information crime. In the course of this session, the member states will conduct a reading of the future international treaty, including the issues of criminalization, general provisions, law enforcement activities. And by the way, the wording of the provisions provided by the president of the Special Commission, a representative of Algeria, they are largely based on the draft convention introduced to the UN in summer 2021 by Russia. It includes information crime, law enforcement agencies to establish cooperation between law enforcement agencies of the UN member states. The final document should be submitted to the UN General Assembly during the 78th session in 2022. The Russian interagency delegation will include the experts from the Foreign Minister, the General Prosecutor's Office, Investigating Committee, the Minister of Justice and the Minister of Digital Development. But we know the failure of the Austria Republic to fulfill its obligations under the above-mentioned convention because they denied visas to the members of the Russian delegation. We look forward to constructive cooperation with all of the UN members in the negotiation track in order to elaborate this convention combating criminal cybercrime. So let's move to another topic, but it is the same area that I would like to elaborate. So it is the same story used by Washington. I mean Russophobic statements. I'm talking about pseudo investigation carried out by Reuters. This time, Russian hackers were charged by launching computer attacks on US laboratories, including nuclear research laboratories. Right now, Cold Rivers was found guilty for direct participation in these information operations proposed by Kremlin. If we're talking about traditional media, that we should provide some facts and evidence and not only the opinion of a country in particular. So this investigation does not include any facts at all. The reference, there is only one reference to the opinion and assessments of so-called independent experts from the area of ICTs. So I believe that they should have asked the Foreign Ministry of Russia first and foremost, because we have the Department of Media, we have permanent contacts with our colleagues from other departments of information security. So we would like to provide you any explanations, some explanations in this regard. In this case, you would have, instead of independent experts, well-known, well-established experts, and they could provide some information in this regard. They are ready to do so, to share their experience. So it looks like this news item is so far-fetched. That is why the US Ministry of Energy refused to comment on it. But the Russian Federation would like to comment on it because we have something to do, we have something to say. We are elaborating anti-fakes, we are doing fact-checking to provide you an article. But still, this story goes in line with Joe Biden administration that tries to depict Russia as the main evil in information space. The implementation of these activities goes through private companies, NGOs, and media. So I believe that the latter, in pursuit of its own goals, in pursuit of print run, so they use any leaks of information without fact-checking the data they disseminate. So it is noteworthy that in this case, the US didn't resort to bilateral channels of communications created for these aims, neither to the UN relevant open-ended working group that have a list of contact points in order to prevent and peacefully settle all the problems in the ICTs, because this organization was created for this purpose. We have everything, but instead of that, they need article, they need provocations, that is why they disseminated this information canon. But this provocation do not promote to reduce tensions or strengthen security and confidence in digital space, but they're trying to promote their own neocolonial agenda That is why they use these Western tech companies in order to establish notorious rules-based international order without regard for the rest of the world. It seems that they have the right to blame unwanted countries and governments for computer attacks to justify its illegal sanctions policy. In terms of Russia, our stance is well known. In order to resolve all the disputes in the ICTs, we stand up for constructive, equal interstate cooperation, and it is our principled stance that remains unchanged. On the 17th of January, we mark 160th anniversary in the establishment of the diplomatic relations between Russia and Peru, which began with the exchange of letters of diplomacy between Emperor Alexander II and the President of this South American Republic. Russia and Peru are united by the years of history. They are based on mutual respect, solidarity, pragmatism, and mutual accounts of interests, as well as a non-opportunistic nature of our bilateral ties. We share a position in principle for the future amid these difficult times of the transformation of international relations. It is on this creative basis of our strategic partnership, as the presidents of the both countries stated back in 2015, the countries are ready to develop the cooperation in the areas such as political dialogue, trade, science, education, high technologies, environmental protection, disaster management, and humanitarian exchanges. And another very important date in our country, the siege of Leningrad lasted for 872 days since the 8th of September 1941 to 27th of January 1944. It was the worst siege in human history. For almost 900 days, more than 641,000 people died of hunger and cold. We have another figure, maybe 1 million people died, tens of thousands perished during evacuation. Hitler's plans left Leningrad with no future. Having failed in their efforts to break defense of the Soviet troops inside the blockade, they decided to starve the city into submission under the German command. Leningrad was to be wiped off the earth of the face. That is why they used fire bombs. A lot of landmines were dropped on the cities. The Nazi command assumed that the assault of the city wasn't necessary to avoid casualties among personnel, but they shouldn't either surrender, because if they surrender, they should take care of civilians. On the 12th of December 1943, the High Command took the decision to carry out an operation on breaking the blockade, code-named Spark. It included the Soviet soldiers from Leningrad and Volkhov front, as well as the forces of the Baltic Sea forces and long-range aviation, in order to defeat Nazi fascist troops holding this bulge. The commander was in hands of Lieutenant General Leonid Govorov and Army General Kirill Meretskov. Georgy Zhukov and Marshal Kliment Voroshilov coordinated the operation on the 12th of January 1943. After careful preparation, the 67th Army of the Leningrad Front delivered a powerful blow from the west to the east. An offensive was accompanied by the coastal artillery and the aviation from the Baltic Fleet. On the 19th of January, Schlissenburg was liberated, as well as the south shore of the Ladoga Lake. Later then, the radio broadcast the blockade running. The lifting of this Leningrad blockade was a turning point in hostilities. When the Operation Spark was completed, the initiative to conduct combat operation passed to Soviet troops. The situation with the Leningrad Front Baltic Fleet improved, and even Franklin Roosevelt, the U.S. side, sent a special scroll, and I would like to cite it. In the name of the people of the USSR, present this scroll of the city of Leningrad as a memorial to the loyal men, women and children who, isolated from the rest of their nation by the invader and despite constant bombardment and untold suffering from the cold, hunger and sickness, successfully defended their beloved city from the 8th of September 1941 to 18th of January 1943, and they symbolized its fearless spirit of the peoples of the Soviet Union. They demonstrated the resistance of forces of aggression. End of sight. One of the symbols of resistance and steadfastness of the people of this besieged city was the seventh Leningrad Symphony of Dmitry Shostakovich, performed on the 9th of August 1942. Supreme Commander-in-Chief Iosif Stalin, for the successful combat operation and for the lifting of Leningrad blockade, expressed his gratitude to the troops of Leningrad and Volkhov Front. He congratulated them with the victory over the enemy. By the decree of the Presidium of the USSR for the defense of Leningrad was established. The title was awarded for mass heroism and courage demonstrated in the struggle for liberty and independence of the motherland during the Great Patriotic War. The YouTube channel of the Russian Historical Society updated a documentary, and we're going to provide a link. The most important in our life, it is devoted to the blockade, the series, the present and the past. The documentary was made by the TV and radio company Pleiada that includes a number of documents that reconstructs the real picture of from the very beginning of the war. So it is possible to understand the situation with the blockade, why Leningrad did not surrender, how it survived. It includes archive documents from memoirs from inhabitants of this sieged city. So I would like to remind everyone who right now thinks about the media role in our world. One of the TV channels, Dozhd, that was proclaimed foreign agent in our country. So this TV channel asked himself whether Leningrad should surrender during the war. And this statement was frankly responded to. So as a response, I would like to say the following. That is why this TV channel was proclaimed a foreign agent, because they are trying to disseminate disinformation. They're trying to forget the history and so on and so forth.
And I cannot help myself but congratulate the present journalists and all workers of mass media, particularly those that work with text. I'm talking about the holiday that is important for the national media sphere. Tomorrow, on January 13th, we will celebrate the Day of the Russian Press. And we will actually give you the baton, because last year it was anniversary, a jubilee for the Russian Foreign Ministry, which has been existing for 220 years. But now you have an anniversary too, 220 years since the first issue of the Vedomosti newspaper was released, and this newspaper was established by Peter the Great, and has become the starting point for the Russian news and publicist journalism. What has started as a newsletter with a small circulation now turned into a powerful professional community that has tens of thousands of media outlets. Two centuries have the fascinating history of evolution of this exciting, bright, and eventful profession that works for the sake of society. It has great heroes, impressive achievements, and sad stories. Today, despite the explosive development of advanced technologies and changes of the principles of methods of how the audience perceives the information today, the Russian printed media, even after the fact that some of them have become digital, managed to maintain some of the precious qualities of this profession. As always, this quality of journalism is measured by honesty, accuracy, reliability, speed, and completeness of materials. And this is the achievement of authors, editors, typesetters, typographers, and all those who are involved in this noble craft. And we commend your work, and new challenges of changing times will set the high professional standards for the journalist community. But you are successful in meeting them, and an opportunity for readers to have an objective picture of events that are taking place in the world, in the regions and cities, well, even in their backyard, is just your credit and your achievement. And in the lead up to this professional holiday, I would like to wish you inspiration, tirelessness, luck, and prosperity. So, International Life magazine. The representative of the UN Secretary General, Stefan Dujarric, answering the question how the Secretariat assesses the decision of Germany, the United States, and France to give Kiev infantry fighting vehicles. Dujarric say that they see the UN goal as the prompt conclusion of the conflict in Ukraine. And how could you comment this statement and the UN position? First, I would like to say about the UN position, because there is the point of view of the UN Secretariat and the position of the UN member states. According to the Article 97 of the UN Charter, the Secretary General is a chief administrative officer, end of quote. Which means that the Secretariat that is accountable to the Secretary General performs administrative functions only, and it does not mean that they will have their own political opinions. And second thing that you should take into account, behind the words of Stefan Dujarric on the aspiration to put an end to the conflict as soon as possible, well, it seems ironical, but there are double standards, because such remarks on Ukraine, the team of Antonio Guterres say that the world should be achieved in Ukraine in line with the UN Charter and international law, and that's what Stefan Dujarric mentioned in his statement. And the Secretariat, as we understand, refers to the decisions of the UN General Assembly, which are quite dubious and non-consensus based. We're talking about the resolution of the UN General Assembly 68/262 on the territorial integrity of Ukraine that does not recognize the integration of Crimea with Russia. on voting on this document on March 27, 2014, almost half of the UN member states refused to support it. And we can mention all anti-Russian resolutions of the 11th emergency special session of the UN General Assembly, where Russia is called an aggressor. If we take into account the fact that why the UN Secretariat haven't found forces to condemn Western supplies of weapons to Ukraine, while Russia receives unsubstantiated and absurd accusations. I remember that over the 7 years of the UN Security Council Resolution 2202 that has adopted the complex of measures on implementing the Minsk Accords as an international framework for the Ukrainian peace process, UN Secretariat representatives haven't said to Kiev that it is sabotaging this document. Unfortunately, by following this non-consensus decisions of the UN General Assembly, the Secretariat just cuts off an opportunity to be unbiased and to be known as broker in the crisis against Ukraine. Never in all this time the Secretariat invoked this document and never criticized Ukraine for not implementing the Kiev Accords. And this is a legally binding document that should be respected by all, and everyone should refer and invoke it, because it is, again, a legally binding document for all UN member states. So, again, if we're talking about the UN Security Council resolution, each official, whatever his functions and powers are, understands that this is a legally binding document, and those people who work in the UN Secretariat and call on implementing legally binding documents have ignored the decision of the important body of the United Nations, which is the Security Council. Unfortunately, by taking the path of following non-consensus decisions in contravention of decisions of the UN Security Council, which bears major responsibility for maintaining international peace and security, Secretariat just cuts off an opportunity to be unbiased, honest broker in the crisis around Ukraine. Thank you. And now I have a question about Kosovo. The situation continues to be tense there, and Belgrade asked the NATO contingent command their consent to return thousands of Serbian security officers. What is the situation there? The situation in Kosovo is quite negative. The atmosphere of hatred with regard to Serbians continues to escalate. The attacks of the Albanian radicals on the Serbian youth in the Christmas Eve, and the attack even on the 11-year-old child, just shocking. And these crimes just are a direct result of the ethnic intolerance that is fueled by the local premier, Albin Kurti. There are many incidents and attacks that still were not investigated. In their desire to protect their own people, Belgrade have requested the NATO Kosovo forces a request to help the return of Serbian military and police officers. We are not making it up. It was reflected in the UN Security Council Resolution 1244. According to our information on January 6, NATO command refused their request, which was quite predictable. As we understand, take into account the Serbian leadership is going to determine their further steps that will be directed at the de-escalation and the restoration of order in Kosovo. We strongly proceed from the primacy of international law and the fundamental Security Council Resolution 1244. And by the way, Mr. Guterres and Mr. Dujarric, are they not going to call NATO forces, international forces for Kosovo, to respect the resolution 1244, particularly this paragraph? Again, they won't be mistaken because it is a legally binding document. We can pay attention to that. Why not? It is on the agenda, and it's not just being discussed because this topic is full of developments every time, with the efforts of constructive international community and throughout the efforts of Belgrade. The situation is not escalated, but we see one provocative action right after another. Why the international organization makes so many statements on the situation in Ukraine, but at the same time they do not make the statements on Kosovo in their briefings? Why are not they invoking all these international documents? And why then they're not talking about the return of Serbian security officers and police officers? Again, you won't be mistaken if you take the UN Security Council resolution and read out its provisions and will call to respect it. Therefore, the UN Secretariat will prove that it is not biased and engaged. So the key Western countries, for example, the American ambassador in Belgrade, dared to publicly question the relevance of the resolution 1244 because he believes that it was adopted in another geopolitical conditions, and today it does not meet today's realities. And I do not remember when the resolution was revised. If realities changed and if Belgrade have some problems with the resolutions, there could be attempts to change it, but none attempts were made to do that. And the statements of the American diplomat reflect the desire of Washington to cross out unwanted provisions from the UN document, including on the right of Serbia to return to Kosovo their own security officers. The same statement coincides with the statements of the former Chancellor Angela Merkel and the former President of France, François Hollande, that have shown their true attitude of Western officials to the international legal frameworks of the peace process in Ukraine, including the UN Security Council Resolution 2202, supporting the complex of measures to implement Minsk Accords. They just do what they want, and if they say that the document is irrelevant, we're not going to respect it. We believe that all the risk factors that give rise to violence in Kosovo and Metohija will be neutralized by implementing a community of Serbian municipalities in Kosovo, which is necessary and essential for ensuring security and well-being of Serbians living there. However, despite their obligations under the Brussels Agreement of 2013, Pristina continues to subvert the establishment of the structure, and there is no doubt that without establishing this community, the developments of Kosovo will be accompanied with the flare-ups of tensions because of the vulnerability of the Serbian community. And I have another question about the region. There is information about Pristina's plans to restore the house where the Kosovo Albanian figure Jafar Deva lived and who worked with the Nazis during the Second World War, and how could you comment this initiative? We have commented it on many times, and we have concerns over the continued practice in Kosovo to rehabilitate and to glorify fascism. Particularly, they are going to allocate 300,000 euros in 2023 to recover the Nazi accomplice Jafar Deve, who was the ODS minister of Interior in the puppet government of Albania during the German occupation between 1943 and 1944. He was a high-level collaborationist who is personally responsible for massive killings of members of anti-fascist movements and civilians, deportation of Jews in concentration camps, and the provision of specialists and soldiers for the Albanian divisions of the SS Skanderberg. So when they say that he was a human rights activist, it was not true. In February 2022, the European Union and the UN Development Programme have curtailed their participation in this project after the publication was released on that situation and after the international response was shown. The refurbishment works were suspended. However, in Pristina continues its efforts and are ready to finish their work, and by making Nazi accomplices as historical leaders of the Albanian national movements, Kosovars continue to form their identity around such henchmen like Jafar Deve, who is notoriously known as the Kosovar Hitler. Unfortunately, such manifestations and such actions are encouraged by the United States and the key EU countries. They have voted this the previous year. They voted against the annual Russian resolution countering the glorification of Nazism, which is put forward every year in the General Assembly by the Russian Federation. Previously, only the United States has voted against it, but now the European Union joined it. And by keeping silence on the Pristina's policy to revise the Second World War, Washington and its European puppets encouraged the further growth of right radical sentiments in Kosovo. Is Tas here with us today? Hello, Ms. Zakharova. Popov Artem, Tas correspondent. We have two short questions. First, how do you see the decision of the French authorities to start supplying heavy armored weaponry for Ukraine, and what are their goals, and what might be the effects of this decision? We qualify it as irresponsible, short-sighted move by the French authorities in the context of the Ukrainian crisis. It provokes further escalation and will lead to new victims of the conflict, particularly among civilian population living in new Russian regions. We're talking about the Caesar artillery system. Recently, the French ambassador Pierre Lévy have received material confirmations that the French weapon systems were used to shell civilian facilities of Donbass, and we pointed our attention to the dubious statements of the Minister of Europe and Foreign Affairs, Catherine Colonna, that the supplies of the armored vehicles with the heavy weaponry AMX-10 RC won't make France as a party to the conflict, but we have another opinion about that. By taking this provocative decision, the French authorities are opening the Pandora box even more, and they become more involved in the conflict. For what reason are you giving them to Ukraine? Are you providing these weapons for the museum, and you oblige Ukrainian authorities not to use them? No, it's not true. That's why you should not disinform your own population. the line of France to pump Ukraine with weapons have shown the cynical and hypocritical statements about the desire of France to avoid escalation of conflict and the need to preserve the dialogue with Russia, and their serious attitude to Moscow's requests to provide security guarantees. We see that contradicting things that the French authorities are doing. Probably these are just cynical lies and deceit, because in fact Paris continues to spin up the confrontational spiral and calls to defeat Russia. So therefore, they are negating their own unbiased mediation, what France has been talking about.
Признать свою
They should acknowledge its direct responsibility for the failure of the fulfillment of the Minsk agreement and assume that for many years they have been maintaining Kyiv's illusions and dreams to resolve the conflict immediately, not by words but by deeds, through supplies of weapons. And I have another question. Do you have any information about the situation with the arrest of editor-in-chief of the Sputnik in Lithuania, Marat Kasem? So I believe that you have the same information. I know that the media is closely following the incident, everything that is connected to Marat. Marat is currently under arrest on charges brought against him by the Latvian authorities, a principled political assessment of Riga's representative actions against unwanted representatives of the Russian-speaking journalist community and in general anyone who has an opinion in their own. So we set out in detail it into a comment. It was proposed by our official representative, made on the 5th of January this year. They are setting scores. It is their desire to damage, to spoil his career. We will seek to involve the relevant international bodies, including the UN, UNESCO. So I do not believe that we can achieve something in the OSCE, but we will accuse the OSCE in its inaction. But still, this organization must provide any results. So we expect that the politically motivated harassment of Marat Kasem will be responded by the NGOs, just as Reporters Without Borders once did when it pointed out the intolerable situation of the persecution of journalists in the Baltic states. Political terror in Latvia must end, and Marat Kasem should go free and resume his professional activities. And by the way, speaking about Mr. Duzhaygin, do you have something to tell us in this regard? Okay, let's move on. Do we have Kommersant newspaper with us? Good day. We have two questions. The first one is about a statement on the meetings of the foreign ministers of Russia, Turkey, and Syria planned. So, is there any understanding of when and where the meeting will take place and what they're going to discuss? So, still not. We have already mentioned that we are working on the organizational procedure, but still we do not have any information. Is it the Russian foreign ministry following the fate of Russian national Sofia, who is imprisoned in Belarus? Are there any negotiations on her fate? I believe that there is some disregard in your question, because protection of human rights of Russian citizens who find themselves in difficult situation abroad. So it is one of the priorities of the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and our embassy in Minsk is closely following the fate of Russians who are under investigation or who are convicted in Belarus, including for anti-government activities or participation in unauthorized rallies. This topic has been numerously touched upon during negotiation between the foreign ministries of these countries. At the same time, we call on our partners to treat these persons as humanly as possible. As for the Russian girl sentenced by a Belarusian court in May 2022, our consular staff are in constant contact with her parents, with her lawyers. It is not only about diplomatic channels, diplomatic contacts. No, it is a permanent work in all the directions we are responsible for. That is why the work is well underway. So if you do not have any other questions, let's move on. Do we have Reuters with us? Good day, Ms. Zakharova. My colleague has already asked a question about a trilateral meeting. So I have the second part of this question. I would like to voice it out. The organization of this meeting may involve the UAE, which intends to politically rehabilitate President Bashar al-Assad and to push the US out of Syria. How can the Foreign Ministry comment on this information? Excuse me, what do you mean? I mean whether this information is real. Is there any intention to push the US out of Syria, out of this region? Excuse me, by whom? Who does have this desire? I mean the organizers of this trilateral meeting. I beg your pardon, but you should hear yourself. You should understand the duplicity, the absurdity of this wording. Does the US want to... Is there any desire to squeeze the US in Syria? So I believe that there is no ground for the US to stay present there in the region. Do they have any right to do so? Have they been welcomed? Have they been received any mandate to deploy their presence in the region? So I believe that these should be the questions asked by the Syrian government, by the Syrian people, concerning the legitimacy of these actions. They do not want the US presence. They are fed up with that. But the Syrian people, they do not receive the answers neither from the US, neither from its government, nor from the US media. In addition, when I'm talking to foreign journalists, they are surprised that the US is present in Syria, and it is motivated not by political, economic reasons, but by they are present on the ground because there are private companies and its activities are not legal. And these foreign journalists ask me, what is the reason for the US presence there? Yes, it is not official military presence there, but even US private companies are there because they really want to control the situation, to exploit its natural resources, and then they exploit it, sell it. So the best word is that they are trying to cover this illegal trade of energy resources. So if the question rises, who would like to squeeze the US out of this region? So I believe that it is Syria itself, because they are fed up with that, with this presence that has lasted for more than 10 years. The US maybe tries to change the regime in Syria. Yes, these intents have lasted for more than 10 years. And what about this meeting? The meeting is, the work is well underway. We are doing our preparatory procedural things, and we will provide you with further information. And my second question, it is about statement made by Finnish authorities. So Finland stated that after joining NATO in summer 2023, this country has ruled out the deployment of nuclear weapons on its territory. So, and right now I'm citing the country's foreign ministry. What is the Russia's assessment of this statement? We're certainly following the ongoing debate in Finland regarding the country's decision to join NATO, including the issue of the deployment of nuclear weapons on Finnish territory. It was said by foreign minister. He is convinced that nuclear weapons will not appear on Finnish territory after Finland's accession to NATO. We also note that there is a reservation from the Finnish side saying that Helsinki hasn't put forward any preconditions for its membership in NATO, as it doesn't want to narrow the scope of its activities within this military bloc. At the same time, the Finnish leadership deliberately hides the fact that NATO is known to have declared itself a nuclear alliance. So NATO actively pushes Finland to participate in highly destabilizing exercises of the alliance country devoted to practicing anti-Russian scenarios or to join to the use of nuclear weapons. So I would like to recall that NATO's so-called joint military mission exercises involve non-nuclear member states as well, thus not only those of them on whose territory US nuclear weapons are directly deployed are associated with its nuclear policy, but also those who get involved in providing and supporting such operations. We will closely monitor the response to such invitations and to draw conclusions if necessary. Thank you for your answer. Let's move on. Do we have RTVI with us? Yes, we are present. Good day. My name is Ksenia. I have two questions. The first one, on the 10th of January, Foreign Minister of Turkey stated that Turkey supports a 10-point peace plan proposed by Zelensky. Does this hinder communication between Turkey and Russia on achieving peace in Ukraine? Ankara's support for this Kiev's venture is unlikely to contribute to finding the best way to achieve peace in Ukraine. We have numerously spoken of the inaccessibility of this plan, so-called plan for Russia. It was stated by Dmitry Peskov, by Sergei Lavrov, so I do not see any sense to comment on it. We have already made all the assessments. And the second question about Serbia: is there a security threat to Russian citizens staying in Serbia or intending to visit it? Does the Foreign Ministry recommend to refrain from traveling to Kosovo? So we recommend to refrain from such travels, I mean to Kosovo, because they could have serious security implications. It should also be noted that there is no possibility of providing consular assistance in the territory of the province in view of the fact that the Russian Federation, on the basis of the United Nations Security Council resolution, does not recognize Kosovo's unilateral declaration on independence. Thank you. Do we have newsroom with us? Good day, Ms. Vladimirovna. My name is Sonia Rustamova. The National Security and Defense Council of Ukraine has stated that the Russian authorities intended to offer Kiev a Korean option for in order to resolve the problem. Does Moscow consider such options to resolve the Ukrainian crisis? On January 9th, Dmitry Peskov denied this information. I believe that you have already seen it. With regard to the settlement of the conflict in Ukraine, we should like to recall that it was the Ukrainian side that suspended the peace talks launched at the initiative at the end of the last February. So our proposals of 15th of April 2022 remain unanswered. Apparently, the Ukrainian authorities remain interested in spreading such rumors and speculation instead of considering the possibility of achieving the goals of the special military operation by political or diplomatic means. I cannot say something new responding your answer, so we have already made all the assessment. And my second question. Turkey continues its mediation efforts to resolve relations between Moscow and Kiev. In particular, Ankara hopes to open a humanitarian corridor between Russia and Ukraine. How do Moscow assess the implementation of these plans by the Turkish leadership? Maybe you have seen that on the 11th of January this year, 2 meetings were held in Turkey between the Russian Ombudsman Tatyana Maskalkova and Ukrainian Parliamentary Commissioner for Human Rights, first in a bilateral format and then with her Turkish counterpart. So the outcome of these negotiations had already been commented by Tatyana herself. And in terms of these plans, I would like to recall you the following thing. Please let us remember the situation in March last year. The people of Donbass under control of the Kiev regime. So when they tried to enter the territory of the Russian Federation, let us remember what happened then. They were prohibited, they were banned. They were forced to use Ukrainian-Polish border to cross it, and then through Belarus or through Kaliningrad to use this territory to come back to Russia, or even to go further, to come home. So such initiatives, such proposals shouldn't have a deadline. If there is a desire to help people, thus this desire should have some breaks, holidays, because people have been suffering for many years in this region, and people have required and they are requiring help, assistance. People do so in different regions, on different territories, and we should remember them. If there is a desire, this desire shouldn't be limited by opportunistic beliefs. So I remember the period when the Polish authorities delivered a blow on a diplomatic mission of the Russian Federation in Poland. Thus, it was very difficult to provide any assistance to our citizens. Where were all of you with all these words? Where were all of you protecting human rights? The situation was quite the opposite. The decision was as follows: not to allow the Russians to cross the borders, to go to the Russian Federation. And when the situation was so intensified, it was impossible to turn a blind eye to this fact. What they what they invented. They said that our citizens were detained, were forcefully detained and harassed. So we have already advocated for mediation services, but I would like to remind you that these services shouldn't have any breaks. And my last question.
Yeah, I have commented in detail the press conference of Pashinyan, but I have a question that in the mass media there are more and more reports that Yerevan in his political statements, it fluctuates between Moscow and the West, and they have been offered efforts to activate in the Caucasia. Why Armenia makes such contradictory statements, being at the same time the partner of Russia? As you noted, I have commented that already, and in the morning we have already posted the commentary that contains an answer to a question. We are doing our utmost as mediators. We're trying to be objective and sincere, and we wish to normalize bilateral relations. And again, I refer to the proposal to have a meeting on December 23rd, 2022, and the leaders of two countries agreed to that, but the Armenian leadership cancelled their visit at the last moment, particularly the visit of the Armenian foreign minister, which did not allow us to discuss bilateral relations and other issues of the normalization of Armenian-Azerbaijani relations, including the situation around the Lachinsk corridors. If Armenian partners are truly interested in addressing these problems as part of the comprehensive implementation of trilateral agreements at the high level, then instead of just saying empty words, it is necessary to continue working together, and the Russian proposals is ready to provide a platform for the Armenian-Azerbaijani talks on making the peace agreement, and it remains in force. And that's what I can say, answering your question. But what about the fluctuations? But we have already posed a question in our comment that we have questions not about one aspect. We see several aspects in their discrepancies, and these are serious, sensitive issues, and we see serious differences in their assessments that relevant for Armenia's security and regional security at large. This is why we are talking about it. I draw your attention to the fact that in our work we do not only speak publicly at the tribune, but we maintain contact with partners 24/7, and we are trying to clarify the Armenia's position through official position of Armenia, to understand their position, because there are principled matters, and that's why Armenia should have a principled position that probably there could be some reservations, but there shouldn't be principled changes in that position. Thank you. Thank you very much. Chinese Media Corporation, CGTN, are you here with us? Hello, we have 3 questions. Recently, many foreign organizations have elevated their expectations with regard to the economic growth of China in 2023, and what do you see the prospects of the economic development of China, and what is the role in restoring economy, and how the adapted policy of China played its role? I think it's not the foreign minister's competence to comment and to assess the economic development of China. And China is a large trading partner of Russia, and we have comprehensive partnership and strategic interaction with this country. We're interested in a powerful and dynamically development China and strengthening and diversifying our multifaceted practical ties. And we positively view the decision of China to gradually remove anti-epidemic restrictions, including the trans-border movements of citizens and transportation of cargo, and we're ready to work with partners to ensure the further intensification of Russia-China trade and economic cooperation, and to resume the large-scale exchanges between our peoples in the agreed regime. Earlier, you have touched on the fact that Ukraine is going to receive offensive weapons, but at the same time, we're not talking about striking weapons, but offensive weapons that earlier the West refused to provide, and the Joe Biden recently said that they're going to provide 50 armored vehicles Bradley as part of their assistance package, and it will be worth of $3 billion US. But at the same time, Washington and Paris stated that they're ready to provide Ukraine tanks, MX-10RC, and armored vehicles Bastion. Our positions that is unacceptable to provide any kinds of weapons to the zone where the special military operation is conducted by the provision of weapons by Western countries, and we regularly inform and state this position at the OSCE and the UN, and the US statements and the statements of their allies to expand the number of military items that are going to be provided to Ukraine are seen by Russia just as a deliberate line to protract the conflict, which will prolong the suffering of the Ukrainian people. I will repeat it for those who do not want to listen to that. This new systems will become legitimate targets for the Russian armed forces. On January 10, NATO and the European Union have signed a joint declaration on cooperation that is aimed at strengthening strategic partnership between parties in the intensified geopolitical competition in the globe. The press conference after signing this document, the NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg mentioned that promoting strategic partnership between the alliance and the EU is important more than ever, and that NATO and EU will continue to strengthen their position, strengthen their support of Ukraine 2023. How could you comment that? We have published a commentary on the official website, and this declaration demonstrates that the European Union fully obeys to the NATO. We have many times described the EU as the economic department of NATO. It is not independent, and it obeys to NATO in terms of foreign policy, and foreign policy is actually replaced with military aspects. As for the strengthening strategic cooperation between NATO and the EU, they promote the tasks that were taken on the Madrid summit to promote the new strategic concept of the alliance. And we see through the prism of they see the cooperation through the prism of countering Russia, increasing the military support of Ukraine, and further expansion of NATO. All the provisions of the complementarity of the defense policy of the EU, they actually cross out the EU's autonomy in this area. EU is going to lose its independence, and the same goes for its member states. we're not talking about the delegation of responsibilities. They are just renouncing their sovereignty, and the EU is not going to take any decisions. There will be no debates, no discussions, and the older brothers, Washington itself, are going to write this scenario, and they are going to implement it. Globally, the EU just starts a new level of partnership with NATO, and they are going to be geopolitical rivals with China, and in such areas like critical information infrastructure and even addressing climate change. The aggressive confrontation approaches of NATO and the EU with regard to the countries who pursue an independent line of policy will only impede the peaceful resolution of conflicts, will lead to the perseverance of many security threats and risks. The motives of the United States are quite clear. They're going to drag the European Union into a global rivalry that is started by Washington. And so Europeans will be the vassals of the United States, and they will lose their positions in the global policy and economy, and they will depend more and more on the United States. For decades, the major countries of Europe were dragged into the NATO, into the EU because of many economic and financial benefits, but after that it was closed, and the EU is working together with the military bloc, and you cannot show any independence, you cannot protect your own national interests, you cannot protect even your own economy. EU member states do not have this opportunity now. Moscow Post, please. Hello, we have several questions. First, we have already received answer for the first one. Well, I've done a great job, as I can see. So again, it was a question about Nagorno-Karabakh and the Lachin corridor. So I go to the next question. The defense minister of Armenia stated that they do not see it fit to have joint trainings with the peacekeeping forces of the CSTO on the territory of Armenia. Well, again, I've done a great job because I've answered that question already. This moment was already commented by the presidential spokesperson, Mr. Peskov, and we have commented it already too. Again, then I'm going to the third question. The Deputy Foreign Minister Rudenko, in his interview to Izvestia on January 10th, hasn't mentioned relations between Russia and DPRK. How could you comment that, and how can you comment the humanitarian situation in the DPRK? I would like to say that in the interview of the Deputy Foreign Minister Andrei Rudenko, he answered the questions that journalists ask him. It's not the Foreign Ministry's material. These are answers to journalists' questions. And relations between Russia and DPRK were not mentioned by journalists themselves. So if you are interested in this topic, we have a section in our official website that addresses bilateral relations. And Russia highly praises the current level of traditionally friendly relations with the Far East neighbor, particularly the unequivocal support of DPRK of the special military operation, as well as the close interaction on the pressing international issues. And as for the humanitarian situation in this country, I think that DPRK can answer that question. Is Anadolu Agency here? Hello, Ms. Zakharova. Thank you for answering the question on Nagorno-Karabakh. We have two questions. First is about Ukraine. Ukraine insists on imposing a tense package of sanctions, and they insist on sanctioning the Rosatom. And what is your comment? What do you want from Ukrainian nationalists? Because every day their demands become more and more absurd. Thank you. And second question, American magazine Foreign Policy published a note where Turkey is providing cluster munitions to Ukraine. Can you provide commentary? What magazine again? Foreign Policy. I needed to clarify this information because it actually falls into the competence of our military. But again, I will clarify and will provide you an answer later. Is Verelk here? Hello, Ms. Zakharova, you have partially answered my question. Well, anyway, you have something to ask. I believe that you do not see the essential part, and I'm going to say it to you. And we have provided materials in the official website and the social media accounts. There's many things that are still unclear in the Armenian position and the Armenia's approaches. And once they will clarify their approaches, and everything will become clear, and we will have an opportunity to answer practical matters, and we won't have to clarify the official position of Armenia. We are regularly talking about it. That's what I'm talking about. No one understands it, but it's not our fault. You have to ask Armenia. So now we have the 32nd day of blockade, and the electricity infrastructure was damaged, and people have no access to electricity. You mentioned that the confrontation should be addressed throughout the dialogue, but in their press conference, Azerbaijan has declared their goals, that all Armenians who want to leave Artsakh, the road is open for them. What is your comment, and how are you going to achieve the opening of the corridor? It is a difficult and complex issue, and if we are going to take statements and we'll try to give a response, it is just useless and will make everything complicated. We have a comprehensive position that have an international basis. We have necessary resources, and it is important to have a consent of all parties to the process, and we have to implement this. And this is why we call on Azerbaijan to show goodwill and reach compromise, and we are ready to help, we are ready to assist in implementing what was agreed. But if we are talking about the changes of the official position, we're not talking about serious changes, but we're talking about the changes of principled assessments that were given earlier. It's going to provide and create tensions in the future, because if people make obligations and respect them, that's one thing. But if they do not respect them, they need to say that their approaches have changed, and they need to do that publicly, honestly, and they need to explain it to their own people, first of all. Diplomacy is quite an interesting thing, because it implies different methods of work. But today I have said this word so many times. There are principled matters. We're not talking about tactics or strategy. We are talking about the principled position of a state and the way how the state is developing it. And the second question, you have partially answered it, but anyway, I have a question. In the Armenian mass media, there is negative information that it is the Russian position that didn't allow to adopt the position. Even the ambassador of Azerbaijan in Belgium thanked Russia for the fact that the statement was not approved. And what really happened? What is your commentary? Why we have a question when such geopolitical realities, when we have Russian approaches, but at the same time there is the United Kingdom that takes the anti-Russian stance. We have commented this issue at great length, and particularly commented it in the initial part of the briefing. As for the draft statement of the UN Security Council for the press, we're talking about the Lachin corridor, and all the explanations were provided by the permanent representative of Russia to the United Nations in New York, and it was emphasized that despite our constructive determination, the French authors of the document ignored the overwhelming majority of Russian proposals, and our Western colleagues were not courageous enough even to provide the facts.
It is a part of what we call a crisis, settlement of crisis. There are some provocations, some statements that hinder the process, that put our discussions apart, create new obstacles. There are plenty of such statements. And my last question about the press conference of the president of Azerbaijan. There he voiced the security threat to Armenia. He said that if Armenia does not want delimitation, I have already mentioned all the provocations, all this inciting hatred statement. I'm going to say that there are numerous such statements, and they will be even more, because a lot of interests overlapping each other, one another in this regard. That is why all the there will be more statements like that. What do you think about the Azerbaijani peacekeepers? Excuse me, but we have already commented on it. We would like to understand, and I use your own statement. We provided normal response to this problem because we deal with all of these matters. Let's start right here. The OSCE response was clear. It was demonstrated. Maybe this response does not coincide with the opinion of the people who are engaged in the resolution of the conflict. It is possible, but still we have agreements of the parties, we have a plan discussed, and we should comply with this plan. We should follow it. Please do not view or consider a part of this situation, of this story, without a comprehensive overlook, because this problem is complicated, is multifaceted, it contains a lot of elements. Thank you. Is Asherk News TV channel here? Are you with us? Yes, good day, Ms. Zakharova, Asherk News. So we have only one question because you have already answered the other ones. Maria Vladimirovna, what measures will Moscow take in response to attempts to confiscate Russian assets. Estonia plans to implement mechanisms to confiscate the frozen Russian assets. There is a proposal to use these frozen assets to help Ukraine. So how will Moscow respond? We have already responded to this issue. We believe that the frozen of our assets is an illegal, illegitimate action. The plans of hostile countries, including Estonia, to use Russian assets to overcome its political problems. We believe that it is encroachment on our state property, and it will be responded in a proper way. We are using all the legitimate efforts to resolve this problem, and we're going to do our utmost to defend our state property. The refusal of these countries to cooperate with Russia will demonstrate all the actors of the international economic architecture, the dependence of countries on these opportunistic statements made by Western countries. This situation will demonstrate that they are looting our assets. So yes, I'm using some simple language, but the situation it is. Do we have Pakistani TV channel with us?
News Pakistan. I have 3 questions. My first question is, occupying Indian forces martyred 214 innocent Kashmiris, including women and teenage boys, while hundreds of Kashmiris were injured in the occupied valley last year. What would you say about this situation?
Вы знаете, ваш вопрос связан.
So you know that your question concerns the relations between Pakistan and India. The situation is very complicated, and we have repeatedly provided our comments. We will provide you all the necessary links with the translation into English. We will send you all the necessary materials where we provide our assessments of this complicated segment of the international agenda.
Israel has announced a 5-point list of sanctions on Palestine, which including cutting funding to occupied Palestine, ending privileges for Palestinian officials, and halting the activities of humanitarian aid organizations in the occupied West Bank. In addition, Israel is preparing to evict hundreds of Palestinian families. What will you say about it?
У нас
We have a principled position on the Palestinian problem. It remains unchanged, and we are going to follow this policy, that is to resume Palestinian-Israeli conflicts in order to resolve this crisis on the basis of two-state principle. Thank you.
According to news reports, the Taliban government has given 10 days to close women beauty salon in Afghanistan. Earlier, the Taliban had announced to ban education in girls' universities. What will you say about it?
Ну, насколько
As far as I know, they were talking about one province. The Taliban authorities have already denied this information that all the beauty salons would be closed. In terms of the governmental ban on girls' higher education in Afghanistan, so the Russian government has already commented that women's education is the key to the prosperous social and economic development of any country, including Afghanistan. At the same time, we are trying not to impose our own views of public life on the Afghans. So thank you a lot. Do we have ambassadors live with us? Good day. I have one question on Central Asia, on Uzbekistan. Uzbekistan is undergoing constitutional reform as well as structural changes in government. A history of a new legal social Uzbekistan is created before our eyes. Today, the world community considers President of Uzbekistan not only as the main activist whose priority is to build in Uzbekistan, but also as the initiator of the formation of a new Central Asia. How do you assess the global changes in constitutional reform in Uzbekistan? A new Minister of Foreign Affairs of Uzbekistan has been appointed. What is your comment on it? You know that the Russian Federation is a strategic partner and ally of the Republic of Uzbekistan, supports the support of its leadership both within the country and in the context of the regional rapprochement processes launched several years ago. As far as we can see, the structural changes you have mentioned are part of the improvement of the system of executive power in line with the program on the 31st of December 2022. Sergei Lavrov sent a congratulatory message to Saidov on his appointment as acting foreign minister of Uzbekistan. So I believe that they will meet shortly. We are convinced that there will be a synchronization of watches between the foreign ministries. Do we have World Russia with us? Are you present? Good day, Ms. Zakharova. My name is Dmitry Andreevich. For the first time, we participate in the briefing. So, welcome. Taking into account that you have already heard the complete briefing because it has already lasted for almost 3 weeks. So I have a prize for you. Each year we make souvenirs for journalists. This year it was masterpieces made by our staff. The journalists who are present, they have already received their gifts, and as for you, I'm going to send this souvenir. Thank you for your steadfastness. Yes, thank you. We cooperate with your colleagues. Not long ago, we have already published the material on Bulgaria. Excuse me, can you say who's your colleagues? So what about Bulgaria? Bulgaria. So the.
So in fact, they supplied weapons to Ukraine in circumvention of their government. So they made them. They did that unofficially. It is impossible to control and to monitor all the criminal proceedings that are taking place at the national level, because there are so many. And if there is a proceeding in Bulgaria, it is their domestic affair. But we have a position on that. We understand clearly that the supplies to the Kiev regime will result in the escalation of a conflict. And I'm not using political terms here. It will result in new losses among military and civilians. International law, which the collective West is trying to eliminate today, but still it exists, and there are many obligations with regard to the arms supplies. It's applied to the re-export and the respect of contracts which forbid the supplies of weapons to third countries. And there are control provisions, and Some countries control the spread of weapons through these supplies, the spread of weapons to the third countries. It should be under government's control, but if it goes beyond, it should be controlled by some branches of power, by legislative power, by judicial powers, by law enforcement agencies, and I think journalists should play a role. But what's important is that by answering your question, I was talking about law, but actually the security and safety of people, that's what matters. And I'm not talking about people living in Ukraine. I'm talking about people living in Europe. And I've mentioned that these weapons emerged in Chad, in Africa, which means that these weapons are going to emerge in some other part of the world. That's why it is important to ensure the security and safety of civilians. These things should dominate when people make decisions to provide weapons and when they control supplies. But unfortunately, security is not the primary principle in today's world. They prefer to dominate by fusing tensions, by escalating confrontations instead of sticking to rules of competition. We see that this trend is gaining ground in many areas. Thank you very much. If there are no questions, then I say you goodbye and see you next time. I wish you luck and well-being. Thank you very much.